Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Well, to honor the holiday season, we thought we would take a look at an important archetype this week, the archetype of the star, which of course plays an important role in the story of the birth of Christ with the Star of Bethlehem. It's an important symbol of the season, but it has wider and broader significance. As we all know, it's been an important archetype, an important image for humanity throughout our existence.
Yes.
And it's very moving to think about man's relationship with the stars and lots of different ways to come at that. So hopefully we'll get to them all today, or at least some of them.
As we were preparing for this episode, it was really fun to delve a little bit into what stars are, the birth and the sustaining of stars,
Yes.
and the death of stars, and thinking about all these marvelous documentaries I've seen in the Hubble Space Telescope, images of nebula, and the science of stars is really compelling.
It sure is.
And one of the things I really was so astounded by, and I heard this years ago, that when we look into the heavens and we'll see this incredible vault of stars, some great number of points of light are from stars that have long since died and disappeared. That the light that comes from a star continues to have this independent, traveling existence long after its source has passed away. And when it strikes our retina, the light actually comes into us, which is what makes it visible. And it's carrying information that might have been traveling for billions of years. So the star as the message giver and the light as the message is something that's been so tickling my poetic imagination.
I've been thinking about the metaphor, the trope of follow your star, and how it is, and that it is that we say follow your star, not your sunbeam, not the moonlight, but follow your star. And as a child, I always loved the story of the three wise men following the star to Bethlehem, and the verse from the song of Star of Wonder, Star of Light, guide us to thy perfect light. It just is, I think, a lovely image of that which is always there, and a source of guidance, a source of hope, inspiration.
What both of you said brought up some thoughts for me that I was thinking about as I pondered this topic. First of all, Joseph, I like your idea of the star as the messenger. And I think when I learn about how old the stars are and kind of the science of the stars, I am so filled with awe. I think about physicists who do this. They get up in the morning, they have their coffee, and then they go to the office and they ponder these amazing truths. And how do you not just feel so small, right? When you realize how big the cosmos is and how, tiny and insignificant we are. And it's a wonderful relativization of the ego. And I think if you're a physicist, perhaps you just experience that every day, because it's wow, this is just, but it inspires awe and reverence, I think, to ponder the science of the stars. And Deb, of course, that's such an important phrase, follow your star. And I think it gets into some of the psychology.
Wait, could we pause for a second?
What is going on?
As you were talking, the sun has come from the clouds, and this incredible explosion of light as we probably should leave this in the episode because it's a manifestation of the star, but I'm going to pull a shade.
Okay. Yeah, I did sort of wonder what was happening, but I thought I was just going to keep rolling with it.
He's been star-struck.
Yes, there it was. We were just talking about the messenger of light.
Yes, and our sun, of course, is a star. So
That's right.
It's shone upon you.
It did. So when we think about what it means to follow your star and what we're talking about psychologically, I think we're talking about the realization of one's individual, unique, personal destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this notion that, for every star in the sky, there's a soul, right? Every soul has its star. And it goes to this idea that Edinger talks about. He talks about the monad, this idea of our kind of unique individuality, which corresponds, I think, with the notion of soul, that there's something eternal, indestructible, but utterly unique that is ours. And that seems to correspond to the idea of a star. And for amplification, I'm going to share a dream that Gilgamesh had. So this is the world's oldest literature. King Gilgamesh, who they believe was a real person. So perhaps this was a real dream. It does feel a little bit like a real dream. Here's the dream of Gilgamesh. In the middle of the night, I walked proudly up and down among my people. There were stars in the sky. Suddenly, one of the stars of the sky god Anu fell upon me. I tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for me. All Uruk assembled around this star, and the people kissed its feet.
Oh.
And it's a beautiful dream. And Marie-Louise von Franz discusses this dream in her book, The Way of the Dream. And she says that, up until that moment, Gilgamesh was sort of a generic hero king. He could bask in the love of his people, but that the moment the star falls upon him and is his burden to carry, that is the moment that he recognizes the burden of his own uniqueness, that he has his own personal destiny, his own personal greatness, that now he must shoulder responsibility for.
Mm-hmm.
And she makes the point that people don't worship him, they worship the star. And it's a really lovely dream. And I think she's done a beautiful job at interpreting it, that it has something to do with our immortal soul. And that following your star is something like the principle of individuation.
Exactly.
And it will often require us to kind of follow a lonely way. And she makes the point that it's easier, rather than following our own individuation, to project our personal daimon onto someone like a star.
The story of Gilgamesh and this dream, is a wonderful connection here between individuation and following the star, and it's a superordinate reality.
Right.
And, Jung's injunction to all of us to find our own relationship to the infinite. So it's a both and of how to become uniquely ourselves and in relation to that which is greater. The people worship the star, not the man. So we worship that which is greater, not a specific individual human being, even if a king.
Well, it's not the ego, right? It's the transpersonal.
Right.
That sometimes comes through us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the goal, is for those two elements, those two realities, to find each other in us, in each of us.
And as Jung was looking at this, which he writes about in Volume 8, actually, the ideas of the scintilla, the points of light, or stars, and that the alchemists refer to these sparks of light which are distributed throughout the world, connected to Gnosticism, but also the alchemists were studying the Kabbalah, which speaks about this, but also the sparks of light that are in humanity. And because there are sparks of light in heaven, and there are sparks of light in humanity, the alchemists say in that regard, we are like God, or made in the image of God. If we lean back a bit into the idea of the guiding star, we're back in this ancient Chaldean world where stars were worshipped. And the Chaldeans developed the first very comprehensive system of astrology, which for them was about tracking the reality of the gods, because the stars were the visible bodies of the gods. There were the transitional stars, and then there were the stable stars. For us, the North Star, the pole star, is always the stable star, and that since ancient times, mariners have used sextants in order to locate the position of their ships in this vast, undifferentiated ocean, that it was the stars that told them where they were. In this astrologic system, studying the stars in relationship to the individual has to do with discerning the gods' position towards humanity and knowing what the gods desire, what their opinions are, what their relationship is to the individual, then defines one's fate. So the guiding star is an ancient intuition about the bodies of the gods and how they have this vast influence on us, which goes to what you were saying, Deb, that there is an intuition inside of us, that there is something greater out of which my ego has come, and that is influencing my day-to-day decisions. And Jung said that we project that unconscious knowledge onto the starry sky, which never disagrees with us.
I'm thinking, Joseph, I love everything you just said, and it's sort of spun around for me to this. Jung said at one point that there's two worlds. There's the everyday world, and then there's the world of the eternal. And I think that's so true. And I think we're always longing for a way to kind of find the point between those two things. And it strikes me that stars are a wonderful expression of that, because they're out there, they're vast, whether or not it's, we have the understanding, the kind of astrophysicist understanding of them, or as you're saying with the Chaldeans, that these are the gods, or most kind of pre-modern cultures felt that the stars were of incredible significance, of cosmic, transpersonal, divine significance. And so there they are. We don't see them during the day, but there they are at night. And like you're saying, they can show us where we are. They can indicate what time of year it is. So it's the way that we can find the connection between our own little personal life and this kind of cosmic reality out there.
Right.
And that shows up in our language, because the word disaster comes from dis and aster, the word for stars. So it's like the stars are misaligned, or there's a problem with the stars. That's what disaster means. Even the word consider comes from the word sidere. Sidereal is the same root. So it's something like to consider is to maybe be with the stars. So this sense that we can sometimes, through the use of astrology, for example, leave our little conscious perspective and gain the perspective of the stars.
It's really lovely to think about, the stars way up there and the little spark of the divine that is in each one of us, our own personal star, to think about the North Star that is stable and still, and you can always orient toward it. And then the morning and evening star, Venus, who is there in transit and has long been associated with the goddess. There are over and over again the unities of the opposites, or the relationship between the opposites of way out there and in here. The science of astrophysics, and the symbolism of cultures all throughout time, that which is stable and still, that which is in motion. We're part of a great cosmic dance.
I'm thinking of that Hermetic aphorism, as above, so below.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about how that's true on so many different levels. And now I want to pull in, if I can find it. I was a kid when Carl Sagan's Cosmos aired.
I remember that. It's almost life-changing.
Yes.
Those
it
images.
Was so moving. It was
Mhm.
so moving. And I've read the book since, and it just kind of blew me away. So I'm remembering him talking about stars. And so I have a couple of Carl Sagan quotes, which I think relate to just what we're talking about. He says, "Our sun is a second or third generation star. All of the rocky and metallic material we stand on, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our teeth, the carbon in our genes were produced billions of years ago in the interior of a red giant star. We are made of star stuff." And then there's another quote too. It's very similar. He says, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself."
There's a way, I came across this in a similar vein, where the light of the stars, these neutrons that come barreling through the earth, are so tiny that for the most part they just pass through physical matter and continue. But some tiny part of these bits of energy of the stars occasionally collide with human beings and, in a sense, knock one of the protons out of your body.
Yep.
And it takes the place of something that used to be in you. So there's a way in which these bits of starlight actually find their way into you and add themselves to you. I think it's such an uncanny scientific piece of information.
Yeah. We really did come from the stars. We really did, and in a very real way. It's astounding to contemplate. If you've been thinking about joining Dream School, now is the time. We're offering 10% off until December 31st. Dream School is a unique online course that offers you access to the inner world of knowing, possibility, and imagination. Presented by the three of us, this year-long program provides the space, knowledge, and guidance that lets you reach within and access the secrets of the inner self that appears each night in your dreams. It's an affirming community of fellow travelers, each on an individual inner adventure. Join us in an adventure to wholeness through understanding your dreams, the little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of soul.
Another way that this lives in our archetypal unconscious is that the ancient astrologers assigned certain body parts to certain constellations of stars. Like the constellation of Pisces is said to rule the feet. Cancer rules the chest. And in some of these mystical systems, there's a feeling, an intuition that certain groupings of stars hold or even emanate certain archetypal structures, and that those structures have an impact on the forms in human beings and the forms in other bits of life. And so the ancients would say, gosh, most creatures on the earth have feet. And everything that has a foot like a human being must in some way be influenced by the constellation of Pisces, because there must be one supraordinate grouping of gods that is interested in creating feet. because they're all over the place. Or Aries is associated with the creation of eyes. Why do so many creatures have two eyes far beyond human beings, or two nostrils? So the assigning of these archetypal structures like eyes and feet is also, for Jung, projected into the heavens. But for the mystics, they abide in the heavens and they come to us through the light of the stars, the lumen. So these ancient writings, maybe some of us take them literally, maybe we don't, but they create a feeling, an internal sense that we are influenced by something outside of ourselves. And that could create a kind of reverential tone in us. And Jung said that's a very good thing to have.
Yeah.
And it goes to what you said earlier, Lisa. You've just said in a different way, Joseph, of the relativization of the ego. Someone just asked me about that. And what a funny and awkward, stilted phrase that is for what we're talking about in a much more immediate, poetic, and kind of reverential way, that we are really made of the stars. The stars are ancient. We follow our star. It's out there. It's in here. And all of the kind of reassuringly magical qualities that stars have had, although there's also the phrase about an evil star. The so-and-so was born under an evil star. So like all archetypes, there is a dark as well as a luminous, from our point of view, positive side of the star. What does it mean to be born under an evil star? Doesn't that sound ominous?
Yeah.
Ooh. And what could you do about it? My goodness.
But it does go to this idea of fate.
Mm-hmm.
I think this way that we have felt, securely connected to the stars, and to feel that our fate was ruled by the stars, whether that was an evil fate or a positive fate, it does give you a sense of having a place in an ordered cosmos. And I think most of us go through our day and we may not think about it, but we don't necessarily, as moderns, we don't necessarily have that assurance that we have a place, a defined place, that we have a connection with the transpersonal, that our personal little destiny as we go about picking up our dry cleaning or putting in the pot roast, that there is a kind of corresponding part of our psyche that exists out there in the stars, so that we have one foot in the everyday world and one foot in the eternal. I think that belief in astrology, whatever kind of astrology, and there have been many, many kinds that have evolved, it is a sense of having a foot in the everyday world and then another foot that is controlled by something much greater, that we are knitted up in an ordered universe.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us don't really have a secure sense of that. And we just kind of bounce around like, free atoms or something, bouncing around out there,
Or that we think we are.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yes.
Either there is an order, whether or not we can see it. Jung said famously, or wrote, in every chaos there is a cosmos. That chaos is a perception, and that we perceive chaos for lack of our ability to perceive a secret order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In great measure, this was so much an important part of Jung's work, and Freud's also. Freud found the Oedipal myth so important because it took the chaos of his observations and organized them into an archetypal narrative, which then allowed him to surmise any number of other things. And by the way, Jung didn't disagree with that. I mean, he really thought sometimes the Oedipal archetype in that story is playing itself out. He just said it can't be the only archetype. There have to be a lot of other things going on, and of course there are. So the archetype, which we already know gives meaning, orders the perception, grants us a capacity to see relationships between things that normally would not be visible because they all partake of a particular archetype. And that's visible in the way that a single archetype can give rise to multiple images and not just the same image. And that's a kind of secret, isn't it? That all these different ways, all the visions of the mother in all her different derivations and across time and in all the different ethnicities and cultures, all can be identified as coming from a singular place. So all the permutations of a thing give us a way of grouping them and finding a core meaning for ourselves and a way to make sense.
And it's universal. I mean, that's the thing about the stars, right? Is that we are all looking at the same stars.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense of it, kind of common humanity. It's both eternal and much, much bigger than us, but kind of comfortingly similar. We see the same stars no matter where we are. I mean, depending on the time of year and all that. But
And I think about our appropriate, wonderful ego ability to make meaning of the stars, of this is a dog, that is a dipper,
right.
This is Orion. And the list it's immense. I used to love to go to the planetarium when I was a child. We lived in Connecticut, and every now and then we would make these big trips to New York and could go to the Museum of Natural History and the Hayden Planetarium. And that giant dome with all of the images of the stars was magical. And the narrator would sometimes articulate there's this constellation and that constellation. Man has always seen himself in relation to the stars. The great henges have to do with solstice, the solstices. So we've always oriented to the cosmos, always. We belong.
I want to just share another quote, which I think it's similar to the Carl Sagan quote, but it comes from a play. This play must be from the 60s or 70s called The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Miracles.
Yes.
Paul Zindel is the author. So I think it opens with this monologue and this young high school student named Tilly, and I'm just going to read like a couple sentences. He told me to look at my hand, for a part of it came from a star that exploded too long ago to imagine. This part of me was formed from a tongue of fire that screamed through the heavens until there was our sun. And this part of me, this tiny part of me, was on the sun when it itself exploded and whirled in a great storm until the planets came to be. And she goes on, but it's that idea that the very stuff that we're made of was once part of a star.
It creates a feeling, an archetypal feeling in us, which is so important because it's that feeling that tells us the idea is alive.
As we're talking, I'm feeling moved and also saddened because I live in Philadelphia and I don't really see stars ever. I mean, just one or two.
Yeah, light pollution is a strange idea.
It's what a loss. I mean, if you see pictures of what the night sky looks like without artificial light, and you think that's what we evolved with, that's what we knew until, I don't know what, 50, 100 years ago? I mean,
what was remarkable is when I got the place in North Carolina, because it's so rural, no light pollution. I remember swimming at night, which many people said I probably shouldn't do, but going way out into the water at night and turning over and seeing the Milky Way for the first time, just right there in front of me. And that was shocking, just shocking.
Yeah.
And now being deprived of that is so much the cost of modern life.
But it's a real metaphor, I think, for what we lose with modernity is, we gain a lot, obviously. But one of the things we lose is that sense of being intimately connected with the transpersonal. And part of that arises from our relationship with the night sky.
That is a simple sentence that has so much resonance to it, that when we can see the night sky in all of its brightness and majesty, we are affected of, oh my gosh, I remember being out in the desert years and years ago and being astonished at how vivid the Milky Way was. And it was called the Milky Way because it was sort of milky, I thought. And oh no, it is a river. It is an amazing streak. And we are affected. Our bodies know. And men everywhere used to know.
Yes. Yes.
And now we often don't, because the night sky is occluded by lights everywhere.
And we, I sometimes use like white noise to fall asleep, and I'll like program like a rainstorm and thunder, and it's like, it is nice, but it's like, wow, I'm like listening to a digital version of a rainstorm to fall asleep, and it's a little bit like knowing the constellations by going to the planetarium.
Yeah.
Than seeing them really. So I'm just aware of that, and I'm aware of what it's like to live in this kind of ersatz world where we experience this tremendous beauty only because we hear about it, or maybe make a special trip to go and appreciate it.
To visit me.
Well, thank you. I think I will.
But this idea of light pollution, I like.
Yeah.
Because when I think about our modern world, my own very much included, and our ability to control light in my home can be blazingly lit up in the middle of the night like a noonday sun, that the light of too much rational consciousness, the light of too much of that left brain, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to see the more subtle light of the unconscious.
Perfect.
And so Jung talked about active imagination and the need to dim the light of the ego through a deep relaxation, a movement towards sleep, so that the light of the unconscious, the stars in the unconscious, then can become visible. And so the idea of light pollution is there's so much drive, so much conscious need that it can blind us, and it does blind us to other things.
Yeah, that's a wonderful extension of the analogy, Joseph. Yeah.
I want to read you a great quote. I believe it's from Paracelsus, which goes to this idea of the secret lights in the darkness, the secret light in the unconscious. Paracelsus was a somewhat ancient alchemist who had an enormous influence on early chemical experiments, but also in philosophy. He was widely known by Europeans, and something Jung would have studied just as a classicist, as a student. So one phrase he says, "Man is a prophet of the natural light. He learns the lumen naturae through dreams, among other things. As the light of nature cannot speak, it buildeth shapes in sleep from the power of the word of God."
Oh.
Wow.
So we've been brought back around to dreams and the light within dreams, the lumen.
Which also you have to experience when the light of consciousness gets dimmed. In fact, I think Jung used that analogy at one point, that Jung said, "I suspect we're dreaming all the time. But just like you can't see the stars during the daylight, you have to wait for the ego to go to sleep before you can see dreams.
Yeah. And, the possible danger or downside of too much consciousness that we might say is reflected or imaged by all the lights at night in most of the towns and cities that most of us live in, and our very individualistic kind of culture, make it hard to see what's there in the dark. They make it hard to see the stars in the dark night sky, and they make it hard to see what is going on in the rich, generative darkness of the unconscious, which is where we find our dreams and their connection to something mysterious that we call the dream maker or the self of where do they come from? And can we see them? Can we notice them? Or are they occluded by too many city lights, the city lights of consciousness?
Deb, I love that you brought in the self, because I think that the star is a wonderful image for the self.
Yes.
That sort of eternal, greater than ego part of ourselves that Jung once referred to as the God within.
So when we think about the worship of stars, the interest in stars, Jung found that so important because the self, the archetypes are invisible to the ego. We don't encounter them directly. And so he writes, this is a quote from Jung, "The starry vault of heaven is in truth the open book of cosmic projection, in which are reflected the mythologiums, i.e. the archetypes. In this vision, astrology and alchemy, the two classical functionaries of the psychology of the collective unconscious, join hands." So if we take that at face value, that in the ancient world and for children as well, even now, to look upon the stars and then to notice the recurrent fantasies that we project onto the stars tell us something about the forces in our own unconscious that want to be made visible through the fantasies that we have about things that are as neutral as stars. And so when we think of the stars as holding our own archetypal material, and then Paracelsus saying that the stars are the things that shape our dreams, Jung writes about both of those things because he's trying to talk about the influence that these eternal forces have even in our very private parts of our psyche, all the way down to our dreams, that there is a relationship between these things, these mysteries.
It goes back to as above, so below. As above in the cosmic mysteries and awe, so below in each of us. Macrocosm and microcosm. And there's a relationship and that encourages us and has encouraged mankind from early beginnings to build the henges and create the cosmologies to make meaning for themselves of what they were really immersed in, living in. That urge, the religious instinct, which Jung says is one of only 5 instincts. We only have 5 instincts, according to Jung, and the religious urge is one of them, that we seek what is numinous, we seek what is greater, and we recognize that we are part of a greater whole.
Deb, you mentioned the henges, and pretty much every culture has had like a foundational relationship with the stars. And I'm thinking in particular of the Maya, the ancient Maya. They were unbelievable astronomers. I mean, the accuracy of their predictions, the way they understood the movement of the stars, the buildings that they built to observe them and mark them. It's just staggering. You really appreciate how meaningful this relationship has always been.
Another piece of work that Jung associated with the starry heavens is that the multiplicity of stars and the writings of the alchemists and Kabbalists, to him, reinforced the idea of the multiplicity of the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
That we are not just our ego, or as I like to tell my analysans, at the very least, you are ruled by a committee. At the very least, but maybe far more than that. And that if we think of every kind of consciousness as a point of light, then inside your head, there is a constellation of points of light, scintilla, each of them being a guiding complex. Jung called them functional complexes that come together in such a way that you have a cohesive sense of self and you have a sense of inner resources. The idea that the ego is just one thing, or that you yourself are walking around as a single thing, didn't match what Jung was observing, both in his deep dialectic work with patients, but also in the dreams of patients. So the many stars outside and the many points of light in us seem to correspond to his observation, and the idea of the monad, which is there is a central sun among the great starry heavens, goes to what you were saying, Lisa, about the self, having one ordering center of all things. In the Kabbalah, there is a part of their creation myth, is that at first, well, one, there is an unknowable divinity called the Ein Sof, which is depicted as darkness because we have no possibility of perceiving what that is. But this unknowable God creates a void within its own substance and projects a kind of divinity into that. This divinity is all one thing, and all that it could be is held in a potential state. This one thing creates a substance where it can perceive itself. And in that regard, the entire universe at that moment becomes a symbol of a greater reality. The universe is a symbolic representation of what God discovers itself to be.
Wow.
And that mirror is said to be this great field of light that is ordered and structured. And the great symbol of that is the starry heavens, which is said to be the ordering of light. And prior to that, a single field of light where nothing was differentiated. So the movement from the one great light to the differentiated points of light is that first capacity for self-reflection. Now, one could make a good case that the ancient rabbis were projecting their own deep psychological processes onto this astronomic phenomena as the alchemists were, and that's just fine as well. But this need to know ourselves and to order that knowledge, and that the starry heavens give us a perfect metaphor for that kind of process.
You know, stars have inspired these kinds of cosmologic reflections. That's really beautiful, Joseph. That's such, I'm just struck by the way that this topic has just taken us into really deep water, which is not surprising, right? Because we're actually talking about a cosmological phenomenon. It is deep and beautiful and awe-inspiring. And the stars have always inspired us. They've inspired songs and poetry, and they've inspired us and filled us with beauty, and they've reassured us, as we were saying earlier, that we're a part of things and that we belong. And, it takes me or it puts me in mind of a quote from perhaps my favorite book, which is The Lord of the Rings. So, and of course, if you're a Tolkien fan, you know how important the stars are to the elves and therefore to all of Middle Earth. So I'm just going to read just a little bit from The Return of the King. So Frodo and Sam are in the land of Mordor, and there's hardly any water and there's hardly any food. And Sam tells Frodo to go to sleep, and Frodo sighed and was asleep almost before the words were spoken. Sam struggled with his own weariness, and he took Frodo's hand, and there he sat, silent, till deep night fell. Then at last, to keep himself awake, he crawled from the hiding place and looked out. The land seemed full of creaking and cracking and sly noises, but there was no sound of voice or of foot. Far above the Ephel-Duath in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach.
Our dreamer is a 56-year-old female who is a writer and academic. She titles this dream, Helping the Baby Escape. I am in a cellar with a baby or toddler, dressing him because I'm going to help him escape. High on the wall is a barred window. Someone on the outside is sawing on the bars. We are waiting for them to finish. And also for Leo Tolstoy to appear on TV. Because he is going to make some kind of speech, and at that time everyone's attention will be on him, and the escape can be made. I think I see him in a glimpse, like a big gray-haired and bearded wizard, Harry Potter type. The next moment, I'm getting into a car. I think the baby is in a baby seat in the front passenger seat. I'm going in at the back, but the space is so sparse, I have to go in head first and lie flat on the back seat. For context, she writes, the day before the dream, I learned that the man I have a very deep and complex unreturned feelings for, and whom I probably should get over with, is probably in a relationship with someone else. We meet regularly for sex. The main feelings were anxiety for the escape, but maybe even more, a somewhat surprising calm sense of control. As long as I could wait for the right moment, it would work out fine. Frustration about not having space in the car. She adds a few associations. I used to dream a lot about driving, usually way too fast over narrow bridges, tunnels, or steep mountain paths. This has come to an end, and I don't like that I was here in the back seat and that there wasn't even space provided for me. I'm also unsure as to whether I was really included in the escape plan or was just a helper for the baby. I quite often dream about babies or being pregnant, often beautiful dreams. Tolstoy I associate with an old wise man who spoke about peace, but also with a somewhat human gap between ideal and reality, consciousness and body, as he also preached celibacy, but had about 14 children. Reading his Kreutzer Sonata about mad, passionate love and murder made a huge impression on me years ago. So, the setting, she's in a cellar. I find that it's not uncommon for people to dream about, for instance, being in the basement of their childhood home or going down into basements. Jung had a dream where he went down into his basement and then found a trapdoor and went down and down and down. And so, in one way, the cellar I often associate with the personal unconscious in as much as it's not arcane. It's something that we're not looking at generally, but could look at if we just opened the door and went down and poked around a little bit.
Right.
So it's an accessible part of the unconscious where often things are stored, but not tended to generally by the conscious mind.
Forgotten until you look at them and then you're like, oh yeah, there was that. I forgot about that, Yeah.
And she's working in that realm, looking at stuff that perhaps at one point she knew, and now she is trying to help something that was stored in the basement escape out into the light of day.
I am really pondering the image of the baby. And, at this time of year in the Christian story, the new beginning is symbolized by the birth of a baby. And the baby is not born in a wonderful castle with throws of attendants and ermine blankets. It's somewhere outside the manger, unacknowledged. And that's often, like this baby is in a cellar, not in the main part of the house, getting dressed. I'm going to help him escape. I'm going to bring something from the accessible but unconscious realm into consciousness. And part of me wants to go into sort of as in real life, wouldn't you just carry the baby up the stairs? Wouldn't that be easier than having outside people having to saw away at bars on a window? And then there is this surprising thing of, and we're also waiting, by the way, while we do all this, for Leo Tolstoy to appear on TV. And I always enjoy these sort of total non sequiturs that the dream maker throws in there as if like, what on earth does Tolstoy have to do with any of this? And so that's a question for us to at least ponder. It would be great to have the dreamer here. What is her association with Tolstoy?
Although I think the ones she's provided are interesting. But Deb, I just want to say you really sparked something for me with your talking about like the divine infant, which I hadn't even really gone to. So there's this mythologem that occurs again and again about the baby who is imperiled, the divine child who's imperiled. So Deb, why don't you tell that story from the Christian perspective?
Well, I'll tell that. I'll preface it with stories like Oedipus and other babies that are abandoned.
Yes.
We have Moses floating down the Nile in his basket of bulrushes.
We have Kronos eating his children.
Yes.
Right.
And Harry Potter.
And Harry.
Yes. Harry Potter. That's perfect. Yes. The boy who lived.
And in the Christian story, I believe that it comes to Joseph in a dream. He is warned to take Mary and the baby Jesus to Egypt, to escape into Egypt, because Herod has had wind of this new birth and has issued orders that every male child under 2 shall be killed. And Joseph heeds the voice of the dream, and they seek asylum in Egypt.
There's also the story of Krishna's birth. Basically, there's the demon king Kansa has learned that one of the children of Devaki and Vasudeva will kill him. So he goes about killing all of their children, but their 8th son survives, and that's Krishna. And they have to spirit him away and across the river and get him out. So this idea of a baby who's got to be rescued it's a real archetypal theme.
Yeah. And it always comes from some place of being unwanted, some place of having been endangered, exiled. And that is where the new beginning arises.
So there's this precious thing, which is in the basement, which, as you pointed out, Joseph, is this kind of part of the psyche that's often kind of disregarded. Maybe you don't put your good stuff in the basement. So it's that the sort of the treasure is found on the dung heap kind of thing. The baby's in the cellar. And then there has to be some kind of rescue for some reason. We're not really sure exactly why. And then there's Leo Tolstoy. And what I got from that was, Leo Tolstoy was pretty preoccupied with like sex and morality and adultery. Of course, that's the topic of his great novel, Anna Karenina. He did struggle with a lot of appetites himself. I believe all of his children, were all legitimate. But yeah, he had really strong opinions about it, and he wasn't able to kind of live out his ideals. So it does make me wonder about the split state she's in with this relationship where they're meeting regularly for sex, but she knows she needs to give it up.
I want to go back to Tolstoy. He also wrote about and had a kind of religious awakening in later adulthood, and can't dredge up all the material from a very long ago class in Russian literature. So I wonder if there is a parallel between what you were just saying, Lisa, and Tolstoy, as somebody engaged in the mundane world of appetites and achievement and children, who then accesses something deeper and our dreamer, where the figure, I wonder if Tolstoy could represent something like that in her, of the mundane life that we all live, that certainly includes sex. And something else that's starting to come to the surface of, I know this isn't really the real deal.
Yeah, that's interesting, Deb, because the dreamer, I'm just checking again. Well, she's 56. And Tolstoy I don't know when that was that he really had this sort of religious conversion, but he got excommunicated from the church and he freed his slaves, and he was communicating with Gandhi, and he was going to give away his entire estate, and his wife did not really like that idea. So there was a sense that he really tried to live out his ideals, especially toward the end of his life. And he always wanted to just be a poor hermit, basically, a mendicant. And he finally did that and died like the next day, or died a day or two later at a train station after he left home. But that image of him as sort of a wise old man with a big white beard, that would have been from those later years. So I think it's interesting that she's not sure if she is part of the escape or if she's just the baby's helper. I think there's something there about how we understand our relationship with the unconscious. And it goes maybe to that idea that we were talking about earlier about the relativization of the ego. Because in a sense, I think like psychologically, of course, we're always just the baby's helper. Like we're sort of the function of ego is to navigate the inner and outer world and to make it possible for our inborn destiny to become manifest.
I'm paying attention to, the resolution, the end of the dream, of our dream ego's getting into a car. Baby seems to be in the front seat and on the passenger side. I'm in the back, but the space is sparse. So I have to go in head first and lie flat on the back seat. So our dream ego is in the vehicle and isn't, in the sort of conscious sitting up position, but, sort of in the dark where you can't see too much if you're lying flat on the back seat. And then there's all the imagery of the back seat, of that it implies to me that something is coming online about a new beginning. And I am wildly curious about, I wonder who's driving the car. Who could that be? And typically in dreams like this, oftentimes a dreamer will say, well, I don't know. I mean, I never got a look at him or her, just somebody driving. and that there's this mysterious agency, sense of agency, who can drive a car the way we kind of get around in the world.
And it's going to get away.
And we're getting away. So the baby's out of the basement and you're on your way somewhere with our dream ego, still not really fully a part of things, nevertheless going.
Along for the ride.
Yep.
I think the troubling part of the dream for me is that there's a quality of compulsion in the dream. That she doesn't seem to know why she's doing a lot of the things she's doing. It seems that she is in service to something else that's driving her car. And I'm just curious about it. I'm sure there's more detail in the dream if we were to try to remember more fully. I feel like things are missing from the dream.
I'd really want to ask her, why are you escaping? Who do you need to escape from? What, who's rescuing you? You're right, Joseph. We don't really have a sense of that.
Overall, my sense is one, I can feel myself smiling. Something new is beginning. It's not all clear yet. Don't we often begin something without fully knowing, all of the ins and outs and whys and wherefores? Nevertheless, the dream says she is in the car with the baby going somewhere. Something has happened, and, my sense is like a good serial of like, well, stay tuned. And then what happens?
Yeah, I mean, there is like a lysis or a resolution to this dream, right?
Yes.
She gets away. And I want to say, as I do, I put a lot of stock in this report on the feeling. She says, there was a surprising calm sense of control. As long as I could wait for the right moment, it would work out fine.
Yes.
So there's this sense of needing to find the right moment, and the right moment has to do with this kind of pronouncement by Tolstoy when people will be sort of, I thought that was interesting though, because it's sort of like everyone's going to be focused on that. That's going to be the thing that's conscious. That's going to be the thing that's known, is whatever Tolstoy has to say. And that's the moment that this kind of shadowy thing can happen. I don't quite know what to do with that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm going to take a shot in the dark. Since Tolstoy's associated with War and Peace, I mean, that's one of the cornerstones, I think, of how he lives in the culture. And his primary message is about the futility of war. And she's just found out that a man that she's in love with, that has been her lover, is now in a relationship with another woman. And so she has a choice inside of her. Is she going to go to war, or is she going to seek peace? And so what I'm thinking is that the decision to just take her child or the child and just leave, just go, and maybe even go in a way that nobody notices. When your lover has become interested in somebody else, the option of just kind of turning away, walking in the other direction and making the life that you want is a little bit like just hopping out of the basement, hop into the car and just drive away. It's not a lot of noise. There's not a lot of fighting. There's not a lot of recriminations. There's an inevitability of what's kind of happening, and that we can't force somebody to want us or to love us. We simply have to absorb the reality. So Tolstoy is there advocating for the futility of war. She makes a nonviolent slip out through the back door, and she should take her toddler with her, which is her own potential, her life, her joie de vivre, and jump in the car and find better environs for your heart and your creativity, for who you want to be, and doing it quietly and secretly without a big confrontation might be what's advised.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.